That's your son?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple things going on right now that I don't think have ever happened before. The first one I knew about. The other one I did not. And that's I've got somebody on the line who wants to talk about something we were talking about last night. And listen, if if you've been burning up since last night, wanting to say something about what we were talking about 24 hours ago, I got to talk to you right off the bat. Before we even introduce the show, before I even tell people who I am, I want to hear from Lena in Grand Forks. Welcome to the program. Oh, okay, gotcha. I was it was misrepresented to me. Gotcha. Appreciate that. Correct. Mm-hmm. Okay. Wow. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And for in case people aren't familiar with the story, the Red Hen is the restaurant that kicked Sarah Huckabee Sanders out in Virginia over the weekend, and that, of course, was the source of some controversy. Right. What she said was that we've reached a point in our culture where people have to make, I believe the words were uncomfortable, uh, and potentially confrontational decisions in order to uphold their moral values, which was a statement that I found interesting because it implies that the decisions we make about the relationships we enter into and the transactions that we consent to have an underpinning of expression about who we are and what we believe, and that's important. And if indeed that's important when you're making a decision about whether or not you're going to serve Sarah Huckabee Sanders, it's also important when you're making a decision about whether or not you're going to bake a cake for a gay wedding. Right, right, right. It's not comfortable, but often standing on your principles isn't. And it kind of speaks to the fact that you evoke comfort. I find interesting because one of the words that's often bantied about is courage or bravery. Whenever somebody stands up and proclaims their liberal bona fides, signals their virtue. The example that comes to mind is when Oprah got up in front of, I think it was a Golden Globe audience that's populated with people who adore her and want to be her and want to be hired by her, right? Populated by all of her friends and all the people who agree with her ideologically, and gets in front of them and very courageously declares that rape is bad, which I didn't think any of us needed that lesson. Like, I didn't think we needed to be convinced that rape is bad, but apparently that's the bravest thing that anybody's ever done, going in front of a completely friendly audience and saying something that nobody disagrees with. When in actuality, what takes courage is to stand up in those situations that you're referencing, where you have something to lose. You have something to genuinely push back against you and to deprive you of something that you actually value, whether that be a community's respect or the sustenance of your business, whatever the case may be, because you're standing upon something that you believe that's unpopular. Right? Yeah. Right. You know what I find interesting? Have you watched by chance? I know this is, I'm kind of casting a line out here, but have you watched the Netflix show Love, the Judd Apatow? Yeah. Right. Yeah, there are plenty of examples you can point to in art, in drama, where this type of searching and longing for something that's really obvious and right in front of you, but you don't want to accept it. So in the case of this show Love, it's about this couple that's in the process of getting together. And both of them individually are kind of dealing with the fact that they want to find vindication and satisfaction and comfort and a sense of security and purpose and the security that they're actually moving forward with their lives in a positive direction. And all of that could be achieved by this old-fashioned thing known as marriage, right? But it can't possibly be. Like, there's one scene where the female lead actually says, marriage can't possibly be the answer. That's just ridiculous. That's old-fashioned. But everything that she's searching for, feebly through the other mechanisms and her other relationships, points to that. Like, ultimately, that's what she wants, but she can't admit to herself that that's what she wants. And I think that that's a metaphor for so many of the things in our modern society where the answers are really simple and traditional and obvious, but because they're simple, traditional, and obvious, people don't want to accept that that's the answer because it's got to be something new and it's got to be something edgy. Mm-hmm. Right. Correct. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Well, Lena, it's been fantastic to hear from you tonight. I appreciate you calling the show. I hope you'll continue to listen and continue to call because I love your insights. All right. Have a good night. Well, how about that? How about them apples? Walter Hudson, by the way, closing argument thing of the program. I usually tell you that right off the bat, but I just had to get to that call because I just found it so unusual that somebody was waiting for me before I even got on the air tonight. Twin Cities News Talk, M1130, 1035 FM. You can catch us streaming at TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com and on your iHeartRadio app. We're here 9 to 11 weeknights. Brad Olin back in the house, taking your phone calls, producing the show. Great to have him back. 651-989-5855, the number to join us. The other thing we got going on tonight that's highly unusual, we have a candidate for U.S. Senate in studio with us tonight who's running as a Democrat, and that's not the unusual part. Like, that's unusual enough. But in the next hour or so that we have a conversation, I assure you, you are more likely to agree with him on the various policy issues we tick through here over the course of the next hour than with me. So we got a Democrat in studio whose positions on the issues are more likely to be aligned with yours as the likely conservative listener than they are with mine. So let's dive right into it. Steve Carlson is in studio with us, running for the U.S. Senate as a Democrat. Which lane? Are you going for Tina Smith's seat or for
Amy Klobuchar?
Push your on button.
Oh, sorry.
I should have given you the tutorial.
Is it on now or no?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, Amy Klobuchar.
Amy Klobuchar's seat.
Okay. That's correct. Yeah. Hi, Walter. Thanks for having me on. I'd like to present my case for getting the votes of all your listeners in the upcoming primary August 14th against incumbent U.S. Senator Amy Klobuchar. And the early voting for the Senate primary actually starts this Friday, June 29th. And the DFL is getting their faithful out to support their endorsed candidates. But listeners should reject the incumbent Amy Klobuchar and another endorsed candidate, Ilhan Omar, and I'll get into that. But I also am here to participate in and really to celebrate talk radio, which is really unique to the United States, our great country, because it's built on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. And yet it's also about the serious business, and your listeners are about the serious business of self-governance, using our freedoms and liberty to actually, to a large degree, govern ourselves. It's an amazing enterprise, and yet at the same time, a fragile enterprise, as Maxine Waters is driving home, and last year's mass shooting of Republican congressmen while they were playing baseball drives home. And that's my opening introduction there.
All right. Well, I appreciate you offering it. Now, we should talk a little bit about how this came about that you're even sitting here.
Sure.
We had Bob Anderson, who's running for the other Senate seat that's up this year as a Republican. He's going for the seat currently held by Tina Smith. And he is challenging the Republican-endorsed candidate in a primary. We had him on, I believe it was Thursday or Friday. Perhaps it doesn't matter. And I don't know if you were listening to that show or he contacted you during the show, but I started hearing from you like that night as I'm going home. I started getting tweets from this guy, Steve Carlson.
That's right.
And listen, I had known of you prior, during my Tea Party years.
Okay.
I recall seeing your name and seeing your tweets, and I don't remember the exact context, but what's the background there? Because you're running as a Democrat, but a lot of the ideas that you're standing for, like you're a supporter of Donald Trump, is that fair to say?
I think that's very fair.
And a lot of the ideas that you're running on would typically be characterized as conservative ideas. So what's the story behind that? Okay,
well, I don't really like to get in politics, believe it or not. I was very happy being out of politics. I have a background at the University of Minnesota in the government there. But when I saw what was happening when Obama came into office and with the healthcare crisis, and the other thing that really triggered me was the Gitmo, when they were going to shut that down and bring it to Thompson, Illinois, which is about 150 miles down the river. I don't know if you've ever looked at that, but it's very close on the Mississippi River. And so I just had to get involved. So I joined the Independence Party, but the reason I did that is because I think I really am a Democrat, but because of these gender quotas and these race quotas, they even have a Somali caucus.
You mean in terms of the candidates they're willing to put up?
No, their quotas are being able to vote. So this is actually a violation of your voting rights, because when you go to a precinct caucus, I went there once for a friend of mine who is a Chicano leader, because he wasn't feeling well. So I went there and I tried to get him on as a delegate, which I did. Mm-hmm. At the end of the meeting, this woman who is presiding over the meeting says, well, by the way, the DFL laws and policies require that we have at least 50% women on the voting delegation that's going to go forward to
I didn't realize they had that.
Yeah, that's in the Constitution, I believe, is under outreach.
So what do they do if they don't even get enough people showing up in the room who are interested in being delegates to fit their quota?
I don't know. But in this case, there were enough women, but they hadn't got on the delegation. So at the end, she says, so I would like you, since your friend, is not here, would he like to be an alternate? Because he's a male. We don't have enough women. Uh-huh. And I said, well, I don't think so. And I started going in and talking about his work as the director of Migrants in Action, and he had done so much work. And she says all of a sudden, oh, well, he's a minority. That's okay. And she moved on, and she knocked about 8 men off the voting delegation. So to me, I can't vote. I can't participate. And the state law actually says that if you don't agree with this principle, uh-huh. that you can't participate. So I stayed away from that, and I went to the Independence Party. Now, you say that's conservative. I don't really think my ideas are conservative, because maybe we all agree on a lot more than we think. We want to solve the problem.
All right. Well, let's get into a few of those ideas when we return. The first thing I want to talk about, just because it's fresh in the news right now, is the Supreme Court's decision upholding Trump's travel ban, which of course leads into a discussion of immigration. I know that's one of the issues you care a lot about based upon what we've seen on Twitter over the weekend.
Okay.
So we'll talk about that when we return with Steve Carlson, running for U.S. Senate as a Democrat, supporter of Donald Trump, 651-989-5855. Closing argument. My name is Walter Hudson, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
Hey, you move pretty fast.
You have to. And that was a long segment that went over time.
So did it? Sorry.
Our next one's gonna.
I try to be brief too, but and still have a complete thought,
Right.
at the end of it. But I think fast moving is real good for talk radio.
Well, yeah, people, you got it.
As long as people are kind of tuned into it, which obviously you have some listeners that really are.
Apparently.
So are you a preacher or something?
No.
No. You're elder or something.
I serve as an elder in my church.
That's great. That's what made America great.
I mean, I got my one shot at the pulpit filling in for the pastor when he was away for whatever reason. And it was fun.
My brother's done that too. Both my brother and my sister went down to Rhema in Oklahoma. Oral Roberts, my brother actually went to Oral Roberts and they've benefited. And he was going to be he is a youth counselor, but he's actually a PsyD now out in Pittsburgh. I totally agreed with the woman's observations. It's unbelievable.
It's interesting to talk to somebody young who thinks that way.
Well, we have to, in my opinion, we need to push back on that. And I've liked a lot of what I've seen coming from the Supreme Court recently. They seem like a court again, rather than a bunch of protesters, like Ruth Ginsburg. So you've been watching my Twitter, huh?
Just not too close.
I'm just kidding, but I hope that you would, because that's what I would do to find out, if I was going to interview somebody.
Well, yeah, I mean, I did.
You prepare.
What research I did.
Get kind of in the swing. It's hard.
I try. I don't want to, because I also want to have discovery. You know what I'm saying?
You got it.
I want our conversation to be organic,
spontaneous.
Yeah, so I don't want to know everything.
Right.
Going into it.
Otherwise, you're a good listener too.
Try.
I've liked your writing on the PJ Media. I was checking you out too.
Yeah.
I was reading all your articles, and I liked them. You didn't really write that many though, right? Only about maybe a dozen or so.
No. I wrote on a regular basis. I wrote almost daily for a couple of years.
I just couldn't find them all though.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah. I could go out and search them, right?
Yeah.
On Google.
Yeah.
I do that with YouTube videos. I got like 270 YouTube videos, and I just learned how to trim them, which is real helpful. So I can edit them.
All right, we're coming back.
Thank you.
The U.S. Supreme Court, in a 5-4 ruling, upheld President Donald Trump's restriction on travel to the United States from a handful of Muslim-majority countries on Tuesday, giving the White House its first high court victory on the merits of a presidential initiative. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, made it clear that the court viewed the ability to regulate immigration as squarely within the president's powers, and he rejected critics' claim of anti-Muslim bias. We express no view on the soundness of the policy, Roberts wrote. In other words, they're not making a value judgment as to whether or not the policy is good. They're just saying that this is, in fact, something that the president gets to do. After a series of federal court rulings invalidated or scaled back earlier versions of the travel ban, the decision is a big win for the administration and ends 15 months of legal battles over a key part of Trump's immigration policy, which opponents attacked as a dressed-up form of the Muslim ban that Trump promised during his 2016 campaign. Closing argument. My name is Walter Hudson. Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM, 651-989-5855, the number to join us. That story comes to us from NBC News. We have in studio with us Steve Carlson, a candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat who happens to have views on immigration that are much more in line with the President of the United States, Donald Trump, than you might expect from somebody who's running for office as a Democrat. Your reaction, Mr. Carlson, to this ruling by the Supreme Court?
Well, I think it was pretty much a non-ruling, as you say. They didn't pass on the policy. They shouldn't pass on the policy. Now, if you look at how this all started, one Sally Q. Yates, who was let go, I guess, by the city of Minneapolis this week. They were going to have her study ketamine, I think, and that was stopped, and I'm glad. But she actually, when she took over as the Attorney General, directed attorneys for the Department of Justice not to appear, not to defend that executive order. And I thought that was atrocious because I think they are for national security. And this is a big problem that I see with a lot of attorneys general, where they're being very selective on what they're going to do. I never thought this was a Muslim ban, and it isn't a Muslim ban. The problem that we have is that people are trying to get into the country for the wrong reasons. And I think that we need a president who focuses on that, because we have to stop that.
What would you characterize as a wrong reason for wanting to get in the country?
Basically, because of ideology that they want to carry out violence or overthrow the government. And because part of it is growing out of the war. Possibly, famine, refugee situations, the very bad situations that we need to look at and help them on the ground there. Third countries working on the ground with NGOs and things like this, trying to bring peace, and I think work internationally. So really, we need to solve this situation. But until that time, we have a lot of people that are going to Europe and coming to the United States to carry out violence. I mean, we had a person, and people might say he snapped, but he stabbed 11 people in
St. Cloud.
Yeah, in St. Cloud.
Yeah.
And it's ridiculous to have a governor that says that if you don't like it, you should leave the state, and that is because of your behavior. I mean, and so this first judge who did this out in Washington was obviously ridiculous. He said, well, I know exactly why you're doing this. This is a very sound principle. I talked about this, by the way. I ran for president as well as independent beginning in 2015, which is how I spotted Trump. Mm-hmm. And I saw that this is a very, very smart man. And the problem that we all saw then was especially the persecution of Christians. Okay, I mean, I never saw anything.
Are you talking about domestically or overseas?
Overseas.
Okay.
This is where we don't want the people coming from. And so what they would do, I'm talking about people who were killing off these Christians. Uh-huh. And some Muslims too. They were slaughtering some Muslims, Kurds. They were all targets. And this was the so-called ISIS thing. And Donald Trump says we have to help these Christians to get away from this because they're being persecuted because they're Christians. And so people said, oh, that's a religious test. Well, no, it isn't. The religious test was they were being targeted and killed. Their kids were killed, wives were, the usual burning and pillaging kind of thing. And I'm glad that we started to vet for that. And I believe that some of those countries have been taken out of that status already. and the vetting is working. And I think it's going to go on to work. I think Donald Trump has made it very clear he's not anti-Muslim. Okay, we all recognize that there are a lot of people who are abhorred by this, and very often they're the target of it too. But it is apparently part of the Quran and some of the other religious writings that you're supposed to kill people of other religions, exactly what Ben Carson was saying. We have to vet.
We need to go to a break,
Yes, sir.
but when we come back, I want to get into, because we're kind of starting to conflate immigration with the question of Islam itself. And I understand that they're related in this instance with the travel ban.
Right.
But I want to go a little bit more into detail regarding some of the underlying legal and moral arguments surrounding the travel ban, and then maybe we can transition into talk more about the Islam stuff as well. Steve Carlson, candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat, in studio with us tonight. My name is Walter Hudson. Closing argument, 651-989-5855, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
I hope I don't sound too harsh, but I really am not. I don't actually think it is anti-Muslim. I think it's law and order and what we should have been doing. Yeah, I have a video that I've re-edited and I put it out there. It's one that's got the most views. It's about the problem of Islam and persecution and Obama's strategies and the kinds of things that Ben Carson was talking about, that would he have put in a Muslim for president in 2016, and his personal reasons why he didn't think for the office of president that would be appropriate. But he said for Congress, there would be more leeway because there wasn't as much power,
Mm-hmm.
And that caused this whole big debate with him, and Trump got into it, and I got into it too. But see, I got the most votes for. I mean, I won the primary for the Senate in 2014, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that was at the top of the ballot. So I felt that after we got smashed, which is another thing I wasn't able to get into because it's real complicated. But Al Franken, and Dayton, they totally eliminated us from debates, the Independence Party. And the reason you got Bob Anderson, because he went with the Republicans, and I went with the Democrats. And I suggested to him that we should have a debate sometime where we discuss which way independents should go, with the Republicans or Democrats. And I think I can make a very good case why it should be the Democrats. For one thing, the Democrat Party has to change. It has to change a lot. You didn't know about these quotas. Oh, yeah. I couldn't believe it that people were doing this. This happened when I was over in the Vietnam era, when I was overseas. I wasn't actually in Vietnam, but I flew combat support, as a linguist, Vietnamese linguist. And back here, Fraser and McGovern and Mondale and Humphrey were creating these quotas that were carving out white males from the government.
Mm-hmm.
And because all the other people are supposed to have a history of oppression and exclusion. And therefore, it's your turn to sit on the sidelines. And so if you look at what's happening in the Democratic Party, this is a national rule. This is a DNC rule. And in my video because the Muslims have a quota, and that's why they're skyrocketing. I mean, you look at the Phyllis Khan district, it wasn't just the district, it was also the quota. They have a quota at every level. And so it's terrible.
Oh,
Yeah.
Another
Okay.
minute or so.
I'm glad you watched this because music is cool, the sound. That's why I would listen to it. Fills your car with it's really happening all the time. It's like a drug. I don't actually listen to it very much.
Yeah.
But I enjoy it.
Sure.
Not all talk radio is worth listening to.
Yeah.
That's one thing. In fact, I don't have a movie about it, which seriously puts the subject to rest. Why would anybody watch talk radio? Oh, wow. She's like a socialist or something, isn't she? DSA or something, you know?
I haven't been following that stuff too closely.
I just see it go by quickly on Twitter because I follow like 5,000 people.
All right, we're back.
All right.
In studio with us tonight, we have Steve Carlson, candidate for the U.S. Senate, seeking the seat currently held by Amy Klobuchar. He's running as a Democrat, but certainly the most unconventional senatorial candidate from the Democratic Party that I've ever encountered. He's a fan of Donald Trump, and he holds positions that many of you may hold as well on issues like immigration and tariffs and the views regarding the threat of Islam and Sharia law and what have you. And we're getting into all of that here tonight on Closing Argument. My name's Walter Hudson, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM. You can catch us streaming at twincities.com and on your iHeartRadio app. We're here 9 to 11 weeknights. 651-989-5855 is the number to join us this evening. Brad Holman producing the show. Taking your calls. We got Barry on the line in St. Paul's. Got a question for Steve Carlson. Welcome to the program.
Okay, thanks, Barry, for that question. Well, first of all, I have a lot of parliamentary experience. Okay, I mean, like I know Robert's Rules of Order, and I get in there and I get a lot of motions passed, and I get a lot of things done. Now, obviously, when you get into the Congress, they have different rules, but they're essentially the same. Now, as far as the Senate goes, they're the deliberative body. They very often have a 60 vote requirement. And so what you have to do is listen. And I really can listen. I listen to what you said, but I don't know if Amy Klobuchar was really a blue dog Democrat or not, because I can't really detect any values from her. And I don't want to just go off on her in answering your question, but to me, she's pretty much like, I would call her a wallflower. She doesn't really do anything. She has these little projects, which every once in a while she puts in the papers. But let's take one of those. And I want to go off on too much of a tangent, but let me just give you an example of cancer. Okay, now my wife has had breast cancer, and she's been part of this program, which is a federal program, in which the treatment is supposed to be paid for if you're diagnosed under that program. Well, so that program, the state of Minnesota and Amy Klobuchar is going along with this. They're throwing her off 2 years before her cancer treatment was completed, and they're throwing hundreds of Minnesota women off. Now, I don't even think that Amy Klobuchar gets it, what this is about. I mean, this is breast cancer. Now, on the other hand, look at one of her projects. What does she do about cancer? Well, she has a registry for firemen who, yes, firemen get cancer. It is terrible. But it's going to be really terrible when it turns out just like it did for the women that were being screened in the 1990 Act, where they just screened them and they watched them die because there was no help available for them to get treatment. And there isn't help available for these firemen either. So she's just trying to do basically nothing. And I am going to work across, I know Al says he worked across the aisle, but I actually do. I have a very good track record. People used to ask me, they read about what I was doing in Minnesota Daily. They say, why are you why are you defending the option of students to opt out of paying for MPIRG? I mean, weren't you on MPIRG? Isn't that a conservative position? Well, yes, but if freedom of the freedom of the students to not be forced to participate in MPIRG, that's something I want to talk with everybody about, and we solved that issue, I thought. Right. Well, I don't back Chuck Schumer as the minority leader. What I have seen Amy Klobuchar do is stand up besides Chuck Schumer while they were shutting down the government. Now she wasn't doing it on a blue dog thing. She did it because supposedly they weren't going to solve the DACA issue, and so she voted against a continuing resolution to allow the government to continue. And I have a picture of that on my Twitter feed, which is Steve W. Carlson.
I appreciate the call, Barry. I'll try to follow up here for you.
Thank you.
I think what Barry's getting after is that I think you've established well that you'll be an independent voice. Like, I don't picture somebody pushing you around, a whip coming along and saying you're going to go this way, and you actually being like, okay, like that. I don't see that in your character, your personality. But to Barry's point, there is this question of what it's like to caucus with a party, and you're running as a Democrat. And if they want to, they can shut you out of everything. They can shut you, assuming that they're, they have the majority or whatever, they have the control. They can shut you out of the committees. They can shut you out of being able to have much impact or much of a say. So are you effectively running just to kind of be an insurgent voice, or do you hope to be able to actually accomplish something?
I know I can. The power lies with the people. It always has. It always does. And so we need to address these issues. We have issues like immigration that needs to be solved. Take for instance, the children that have been separated from their parents. Well, why is that happening? It's because Amy Klobuchar and the rest of the Democrats, first, they won't do anything now to allow them to be united and not be shut out by that 20-day limit that comes from this court case, Flores versus Reno. Yeah. But at the same time, who started this? And I have a video that's about the Wilberforce Amendment. Wilberforce Amendment is about human trafficking. And it says that the government is supposed to take these young girls, who they said 80% of them say they've been sexually assaulted when they get in the United States, and meet with them and see if they really have been. And if they have been, to follow up on that and to protect them. And if they haven't been, they're going to repatriate them, not back to the other side of the border where they probably will be trafficked, okay, but back to their countries of origin. Now, I brought that up under Obama. Now, Obama, after the election, he gives all this discretionary authority to prosecutors. And I think they're just, I know some of those girls got put in a case in Ohio where they're actually slave labor. And I
understand the argument that you're making. What I'm suggesting, and what I think Barry's suggesting, is that having the correct argument isn't going to advance policy. That the institutional reality is you have to actually have the political support amongst your caucus and frankly the consent of your leadership in order to be able to do anything.
Well, I don't mean to be disrespectful to the institution at all, but I will want support from Donald Trump. I will want support from moderate Republicans and moderate Democrats, the true blue dog approach. I want to work with them. I want to solve these problems. And as we go through each of my issues, I think you'll find I actually have solutions. I actually understand what the hangups are. And I want to say one more thing, and that is that, self-governance has always been limited. Our colonies just sort of delegated self-governance to people to solve issues so that they could be productive. It's not some philosophy class, where everybody has to agree. It's things have to get done. Governance has to proceed so that we can have a successful country.
All right, let's explore one of those issues.
Sure.
And we're running short on time before we have to go to another break, but I want to get back into the Supreme Court's decision upholding President Donald Trump's travel ban and the broader implications of that. From the Star Tribune, hours after the Supreme Court upheld that ban, Muslim community leaders Immigration attorneys and advocates from around the Twin Cities decried the decision, saying they fear it will prompt broader immigration restrictions and amplify discrimination against Minnesota's growing Muslim community. And they go on to talk about a news conference that was held by CARE, or I know you're familiar with, the Council on American Islamic Relations and what have you. And basically the argument that they're making, the argument that I'm hearing from the left today, is that it's very fascinating to me because they're evoking all these past decisions that the court has made to uphold horrible things like slavery and Jim Crow and similar moral atrocities, and saying we've been in this position before where the Supreme Court has failed to take the right and proper decision. And that, of course, is complete hogwash comparing this to that. There's no comparison whatsoever. However, where I agree with them is in the underlying sentiment that there is a difference between what is legal and what is moral. And so we find ourselves in a situation where, I think the court ruled correctly in this instance, in that they interpreted the law as it's written, they interpreted the Constitution as it's written, and said this is consistent with the powers that the president is supposed to have under the current law, under current precedent, under our reading of the Constitution. But the legal question being resolved in that manner says nothing about the underlying moral question. And that's what I'm interested in. And unfortunately, you're going to have to make it quick, and then we can come back to it after the break. But I'm interested in this moral question of what it means to have rights. Because, a lot of the arguments that I hear from people who are hardcore on immigration, hardliners on immigration, is, well, the Constitution doesn't apply to non-citizens. It doesn't apply to aliens. It certainly doesn't apply to illegal aliens. So you can't cite your constitutional rights when you're coming here from somewhere else. But don't these rights that we refer to, that are referenced in the Constitution, don't those rights pre-exist the state? Don't they pre-exist the Constitution? Aren't they inherent in the fact that a human being exists as such? How then can it be truthfully said that somebody who's not from here doesn't have those rights?
And of course, they do have the rights, and the Constitution is the greatest thing. And as they learn the Constitution, they're going to benefit greatly. This is the same argument that we brought up with Ben Carson and Donald Trump when I was running in 2015 for the independents as a candidate for president. And that is that you have to comply with the Constitution. Like your earlier caller said, once you abide by those rules, you have so much freedom and so much liberty, you're going to love it. You're not going to have to adhere to something that is inimical, that views as an enemy this Christian-based Constitution, which is basically based on grace and compassion and rejects the workings of strict law that somebody can get a hold of and do injustice to you. So this is something that's going to allow you freedom. We have to tone down the rhetoric. We're in a 24/7 news cycle, and people actually believe, some people, they're actually convinced by what the fake news says. It's not true. There's no reason to panic, and it's a time for dialogue. And I don't think Trump is going to take any actions against Muslims. Like I say, he's trying to just screen out the kind of people who are going to be doing harm to everybody, including those Muslims.
Steve Carlson, candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat. My name's Walter Hudson. Closing argument 651-989-5855, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
That name always makes me think I got like 5 minutes left for a closing statement. Because you hear it in courts, Good questions. I've actually thought about these. That's why I find them really interesting. I actually am kind of, I'm both liberal and conservative, but I'm very liberal. But you want to help people. You don't want to just give people answers that are false and are not going to go anywhere. And the Constitution really is good, but it hasn't really been set out by the courts. I mean, look at, like Clarence Thomas said, how these natural rights that you're talking about, how can you have slavery under the Constitution? And how can you not enforce the Constitution for things that you attribute to the states, only for federal rights that don't exist? And apparently there was no federal right not to be a slave. If the states decided you were property, you were property, and that's the problem with the law, They use it, they pick it up and use it to hurt people. I enjoy the discussion. As you can see, I like to hear people's point of views, but I like to answer, the issues that can be answered. Where is Good Feet anyway? I got to get some of that stuff. I have a standing job on, part time. I'm more of a Democrat than these guys are. I really am. Once you strip everything away, these issues are really hard. They're complicated. They can be solved. Where'd you go to college?
University of Phoenix. I got a degree.
Oh, you told me. Yeah. That's right, in computer. Yeah, I was at the university because I wanted to go to the battleground of ideas. I had good enough scores that I could have got into, I turned down a scholarship for music and I could have got into, really good schools. But I thought that was the best because that's where the ideas, of the war, Vietnam War, civil rights, especially those two, they were being hammered out there and I wanted to go and be a part of it. Back in '69. It's like almost 50 years ago. Can you believe it? But I was a Vietnamese linguist. I had to be vetted by the CIA and the FBI to get a top secret security clearance. They got close to the war. So I guess I am a little conservative and liberal at the same time. Believe in national security. But I came back from that war wanting change, and wanting to address problems of racism, exclusion, because I'd seen them in action in the war, what they amounted to, what it came to. So I would like to debate Amy Klobuchar. I asked her to. I don't think she's going to agree, because she's never agreed to debate anybody. She's the expert at avoiding debates. I find it humorous that she was viewed as a blue dog. She's just a prosecutor, That's all she knows. I don't dislike her as a person. I hope it doesn't come across like that. How many people do you think listen to your show?
I have no idea.
Good.
None.
It varies, I'm sure, too.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried to extrapolate based on like the station's overall rating, but you just don't know. Could be 60,000, could be 80,000.
It's great.
I don't know.
That's great. 60, 80,000 thinking people. That's what we need.
Maybe, yeah.
You can do a lot.
I don't know.
Good way to spend your spare time in the evenings.
Yeah, it's fun. I enjoy it at least.
I mean them.
Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 1035 FM. Closing argument. My name is Walter Utson. 651-989-5855, the number to join us this evening. In studio, we have Steve Carlson, a candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat, but he's not like any Democrat you've encountered before. He's a fan of President Donald Trump, and he holds a lot of positions on issues that you would more commonly associate with conservatives or Republicans, particularly issues like immigration, tariffs. Nowadays, tariffs. Republicans used to have a different position on tariffs just a couple of years ago, but that's apparently flipped now that we have Donald Trump as the standard bearer of the party. We'll get into that next hour. Right now, I want to focus a little bit more on immigration as such. There's, of course, a story here out of Reuters. We talked about this a little bit yesterday. Parents who cross illegally from Mexico to the United States with their children will not face prosecution for the time being because the government is running short of space to house them, officials said on Monday. So it's an interesting situation where, Trump initiated this zero tolerance policy at the border where we're going to prosecute any adult who illegally crosses and take them through the whole process. And that triggered this 1997 decree that we referenced earlier, whereby children can't be detained more than 20 days by the government. They have to be shifted into some sort of alternative custody. And that was the dreaded separation of families. And so in order to address that, the president signed this executive order basically directing his lawyers to seek a judicial remedy to that. And now, in the aftermath of that executive order, they're basically admitting, listen, we don't have the capacity to do this. Like, we don't have the resources available to prosecute everyone and detain everyone and detain their families. What's your view, first of all, on this particular situation where do we need to engage in massive construction efforts? Do we need to build twice as many detention centers in order to hold all these families? Or is there something more fundamental wrong with the status quo of immigration policy that needs to change?
Okay, well, we do need a massive construction effort to build the wall. And as we build the wall, they're going to see that we're not just trying to keep people out. We're trying to build a safe, secure area where people from both sides of the border can live and have a good neighbor relations that were envisioned under the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, which in 1848 created that wall. Now, as far as this situation, I don't agree that they're admitting they don't have the resources.
Well, I mean, that's literally what they've said.
Well, not really, because I think you need to look behind it. You mentioned that they're supposed to seek a judicial remedy, right? Well, that's going to require the filing of a lawsuit. So as I see it, they're probably going to pick out a case that they can bring to the Supreme Court that is exemplary of the rest of what they're trying to do and win that case. They're also trying to get Amy Klobuchar, Tina Smith, all the rest to vote to extend that 20-day limit. And now you're starting to hear arguments, oh, you can't do that because now we're condemning children to indefinite incarceration. So you can't win no matter what you do. But I do think that we can go past 20 days. I agree with what Trump is doing now. I said this, and this is what the Wilberforce Amendment did. It screened people to see, do you have any credible case, any scenario in which you could stay in this country? And if the answer is no, then no, you don't need to see a judge. Because what judges do is they look at questions of law, and they shouldn't have to deal with questions of fact. Those should be able to be dealt with in an administrative hearing. I mean, that's not always the way you want to do it, but very often, if we have a law in Minnesota that you can't discuss the Constitution when you're in an administrative hearing for the Department of Health of Human Services. You get your cancer treatment taken away with no discussion. You can't say it's unconstitutional. So just because you cross the border doesn't mean you need to have a long, dragged out, months long with every lawyer that wants a job to come in and make things up. So like Trump is saying, well, hey, if we're very sorry, but we have laws and you don't qualify, I think they should repatriate them back to their country of origin. They shouldn't just kick them across the border, Mexican border. And this is very humane. And once it's done, people will stop this. Now, there are big problems in those countries, and we need to help with that.
Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the press secretary for the White House, said, according to Reuters, this will only last a short amount of time because we're going to run out of space. We're going to run out of resources in order to keep people together, and we're asking Congress to provide those resources and do their job. So that's the admission from the White House that they are, in fact, running out of resources. And, whatever the legislative solution to that may be, we know how slowly the gears of legislative, undergoings take.
I think the courts will move faster. I think they can get this into the courts when they have the right case.
Steve Carlson, candidate for U.S. Senate, in studio with us. Closing argument. My name is Walter Hudson, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
All right, this is the long break, so if you want to use the restroom.
Oh,
get
great.
coffee or anything.
I was going to ask. No,
Okay.
that's great. Thanks. Are you like a philosophy student?
Again, as a layman, yes.
Oh, okay. Wow. Well, that's probably good.
Primaries held in 7 states today. In South Carolina, Governor Henry McMaster winning his Republican runoff election with political newcomer John Warren. But our team, ladies and gentlemen, right now extends from the White House to the State House to your house. And that's the most powerful team there is. And upset in New York, where Congressman Joe Crowley, the fourth-ranking Democrat in the House, won't be running in November. Losing the Democratic primaries to 28-year-old Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, former aide to the late Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy. Also in New York, incumbent Republican Congressman Dan Donovan meeting former Congressman and convicted felon Michael Grimm. In Utah, former Republican presidential candidate and Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney wins a chance to run in November for the U.S. Senate seat being vacated by Orrin Hatch. Attorney General in 17 states and the District of Columbia sued the Trump administration over its family separation policy along the nation's southern border.
Lawsuit says the Trump administration has violated the constitutional due process rights of parents and children by separating them. The Trump administration has asked a judge in Los Angeles to alter her earlier ruling from 2015 so that they can keep families detained together. The suit also alleges that border officials have been turning away families who are trying to seek asylum.
Fox's Jessica Rosenthal. President Trump praising today's Supreme Court ruling in favor of his administration's third version of a travel ban on anyone from several mostly Muslim countries, along with Venezuela and North Korea. Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says the ban won't make the country safer.
I believe that the court was wrong. It's un-American to do what has been done.
The nation's high court ruling 5-4 along ideological lines to allow the ban to remain in place. Fox News. There. And Mallon.
Good evening. I'm Chuck Rejoinder. Here's what's happening. One city administrator is now cleared of any wrongdoing, while another has been terminated in Proctor. Results of an independent investigation by a Twin Cities law firm discussed in closed session, after which Mark Casey unanimously cleared by the council. The council unanimously terminating the assistant city administrator, Jennifer Crown, and placed the city's network administrator on paid leave pending investigation. It is unclear what any of the three have been investigated for because the issue is a personnel matter. It was discussed behind closed doors in closed session. A St. Cloud man is under arrest on suspicion of firing a gun outside an apartment complex. The shots yesterday morning allegedly by Daquan Ledbetter during a scuffle in a parking lot. Officers also arrested a woman tied to the incident. There were no injuries. A new shingles vaccine is in short supply at Minnesota clinics. This new vaccine is more effective than the previous one. It provides more than double the protection against shingles. It is a painful condition beginning with a rash and can turn worse. Vaccines recommended for anyone over the age of 50 who has had the chicken pox. The nationwide shortage is due to the vaccine's popularity. More at TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com. Weather forecast next on the Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130.
This is McPhee. iHeartRadio invites you to see Fleetwood Mac live. Going on the road, what I always look forward to the most is getting into the full music mode and communicating with other players on stage. That's what I really love. Fleetwood Mac's North American tour now through Ticketmaster. And see the band perform at our 2018 iHeartRadio Music Festival, September 21st.
So I just discovered DazzleMe.com. It's a totally addictive new jewelry site with big name luxury brands, and you know which ones I'm talking about.
All right. And you got this mastered.
Wow.
It flows, it flows real good. It flows a lot better than a lot of the talk shows I see on Sunday morning.
Sure.
We're back.
on Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130. Right now it's 68.
Fox News. Twin Cities News.
We've spent the first hour getting to know Steve Carlson, who's a candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat, who holds the interesting distinction of being a fan of Donald Trump, the current Republican president of the United States, and holding many positions that are in sync with the sitting president. My name is Walter Hudson, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM. Closing argument. We stream on TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com and your iHeartRadio app. We're here 9 to 11 weeknights. Appreciate you joining us. 651-989-5855 is the number to contribute to the program. Brad Omland taking those calls and producing the show. All right, I want to get into some of the controversies potentially that can emerge between this. This whole thing started, the reason we have you in the program was over a disagreement on tariffs, and we'll get to that eventually, but I want to stick with immigration here for a second. And I want to throw a couple of premises at you and see how you respond to them. The first one is regarding the issue of the border itself. We commonly hear it described in the debate about illegal immigration. We commonly hear language that describes the border, like the existence of the border, as being dependent upon enforcement of immigration law. You'll hear terms like, the border means something, and Trump said this during the campaign. The border means something, and in order for it to mean something, we have to enforce our laws. We have to enforce immigration. You hear rhetoric along the lines of the Democrats and the leftists and the open borders crowd are trying to destroy the border. You hear terminology like anarchy at the border and things of this nature. We have all kinds of political borders within the United States of America. There are borders between municipalities, cities, counties, political districts, school districts, legislative districts. And people cross these borders, these lines on maps, every day, all the time, without chaos, without anarchy. What fundamentally is different about the national border that requires these types of restrictions about who's crossing it and under what circumstances?
So I guess you're distinguishing not between the four sides of our national borders, but between national borders and other kinds of borders?
What's special about a national border that requires control over how and when it's crossed?
Well, okay, because with our Constitution, all right, we're all part of the government. We all have rights as citizens. And so one of the things that's happening now is that that's being diluted. And citizens feel that, they're second place, that other people are being helped by our public policy and not them. And, people say, well, this is, the country was based on immigrants, it's made up of immigrants, but it's made up of citizens. And there are a lot of people who see this and say, wait a minute, it's not made up of immigrants. They might once have been immigrants, but now they're citizens. And if you want to be a citizen, you should go through the proper process, because citizens are important, because the society's important. We have voting. The voting rights you have non-citizens that are trying to vote in certain elections, like educational school board or something like this. There may be a role, a role that the citizens can do in these places, but it should reside with the citizens to make the decisions to govern the country, and then we can expand that to other people. Now, at the border, the open border policy, it truly does destroy the border. I saw somebody was arguing with me online over the weekend that it's just everybody is kind of. I think it was supposed to be a libertarian argument. A person has absolute right to cross the border whenever he wants. Well, if that was true, then we could have the people that you're fleeing for your asylum, they can cross the border.
Yeah.
How can we stop them? So there wouldn't be any asylum. It would be blown out of the water. So asylum and all of these other compassionate policies and great programs that our country is based on, they have to be based on citizens. You know, in Minnesota, we used to have white citizens was in our Constitution. It had to be removed after the Civil War, but the circumstances were the Indians, the Ojibwe and the Dakota, weren't allowed to vote. They were seen as having their own sovereign nations, and so that was put in there. And so from the very beginning, in our naturalization, we had to control who was creating this great country. People could
Isn't
be.
there a distinction, however, even historically, between the process of naturalization and immigration? Because it occurs to me, and perhaps I just don't know my history well enough,
Okay.
but it occurs to me that the concept of heavy immigration restrictions and monitoring the border was not a founding concept of the United States. That naturalization, which is the process by which somebody becomes a citizen, was, of course, and properly should be, I think. And that's where the right to vote comes into play, and
Right.
the privileges that come with citizenship and what have you. But the mere crossing of a line on the map in order to reside here and work here and engage in relationships and trade was not something that the founding fathers were particularly occupied with.
And if we look at the Mexican border, like personally, I am very much in favor of just human relations with everybody, and that's what I see. My grandfather,
Over a wall.
my grandfather. Well, a wall doesn't need to separate. It can protect assets that are of common value to everybody. I mean, we got
So
four
you-
walls around this room.
You would
You know,
you would compare. So you would compare it. This is what I'm hearing, and you
Yeah.
tell me if I'm wrong. You would compare it to like a fence between neighbors, right? Where just
Right.
if I erect
Private
a
property.
fence on my property line,
Mhm.
it's not because I hate my neighbor.
Exactly.
It's just because I want to be able to delineate between what's mine and what's his.
well, even more to the point is so each of you can have your own private property, and that's what our society is based on. Now, I think one of the problems that's happening now is people do get upset about the employment situation.
Mhm.
And so a lot of our people, obviously, they like to have these people come in and work. And Trump, from the very beginning, has said, I'm going to let all the good people come back. And he got trouble from Ted Cruz about that. You know, things have evolved, but he recognizes the contributions that the immigrants make, even the illegal immigrants. And this is a good thing. But we've got to secure that border because that's not going to work. You know, Farmer Jones having someone pick his crop at a certain time on the season is great, but it's not going to work if we keep having people flooding across that because they're not picking the crops for Farmer Jones and they're just trying to get a better life, which we want. I think they could have a better life in Mexico. They should, and that's what I'm saying. If my goal, and I've had this since 2010, is the first thing that I addressed was the Arizona situation and the border wall. And it is this, that everybody is a human being and has to make a living and has to make it pay. They got to get a job and they make it pay. All of us, from whatever country. However, what Trump is saying, and I agree, is, and Congress has agreed, is we need to secure the border. And because otherwise, it just doesn't work. And people come in to take jobs and then to run past to do things now that they're running. So many people are running drugs. Everybody's not running drugs, but we can't protect ourselves against criminal elements, nor can the Mexican immigrants themselves protect themselves when there's no order and there's just chaos.
All right, so that leads perfectly into another premise that I want to throw your way and have you react to.
Okay.
I have this sense, and it's admittedly a project under development in terms of this philosophical concept, that part of the many of the problems that we attribute to immigration, and you just cited, you know, the rise of the cartels, that's implicit in what you said, the drug trade,
Employment.
the employment's one thing, the human trafficking is another. All of these things, to my mind, are products of black markets, which we've created with our own policy. By having the drug war, by making it illegal to engage in certain transactions, by having heavy immigration restrictions that creates a black market for the trafficking of human beings across the border, we've effectively created this pocket of anarchy in which government, by its own choice, does not exist. And when you have a situation like that where people can't go to an institutional authority to resolve their complaints against their coyote or against their drug dealer or whatever the case may be, then it becomes a scenario where might makes right, and it's the rule of the brute, and that translates into all this violence that's often attributed to the border. Is there a connection there between the policies that we've adopted in terms of what domestically with the drug war and these immigration restrictions and the violence that we've seen as a result emerging out of these cartels and whatnot at the border?
Well, I think there is a policy problem, but it doesn't come from our side. It comes from the Mexican side. As I mentioned, I mean, one of the early popes, gave the entire Western Hemisphere to Spain, to the Spanish king. And that claim has been exerted all the way up to Minnesota. This used to belong to Spain before the Louisiana Purchase. And it's ridiculous. And so, but the reality is that Mexicans have been highly concentrated in the Mexico City area. I mean, it's the largest city in the hemisphere, always has. I think it's 30 million right now. It dwarfs any of our cities. And they don't care about the border. They're making a lot of money down there. They're very talented people. They got engineering. They invented the zero.
All that may be true, but the point that I'm driving at
Yeah.
here is that if you go and you talk to, and there's a documentary you can find on social media called The Wall that deals with that, interviews ranchers who actually live down there.
Right.
And they'll tell you from their 40, 50, 60 years of experience living on the border that illegal immigration has increased exponentially. And they don't draw the connection, but the connection that I see is that it has increased right alongside the advent and expansion of the drug war and increases in immigration enforcement, which have created these black markets that suck people in. Now, the other side of that, I will grant you,
Okay.
which you've also addressed, is the welfare state and the economic draw of being able to come here for opportunity. So it's a multifaceted issue.
Well, I'm not so much into that. What I'm saying is that they're not doing anything else with the border. Now, I talked with a Mexican man about my idea of the border states working together, including 10 Mexican border states south of the border. And he says they simply can't control the situation. There's been no development there, so it's wide open for drugs. We need a program where we show the people they can do other things than raise illegal drugs or traffic in illegal drugs like we had in Afghanistan. So people can live safely because everybody's living in half of these people are running away from that situation.
Right.
I was one of the early people who said, there could be an asylum issue if they're shooting everybody and you're scared for your life. There is one, but it's not one that we're recognizing right now. The other thing we can do is work bilaterally, which I have suggested since 2010, in the area of human rights and security. So we're cooperating with the Mexican government, whether it's those 10 states or with the support of Mexico City, to keep that area safe. I don't see why.
Does Mexico have any interest in doing that?
The 10 governors do. How many people got killed in the Mexican election so far? 120 people is the latest figure I heard. They're candidates, and they're killed in the election because they're trying to address this situation.
By the cartel.
Well, by people who don't want them to have a normal development on the border, cooperating with the United States. So we need someone as a president of Mexico, whether it's Obrador or whether it's someone else, who's going to work with us as human beings, not to demonize us, not to demonize Donald Trump, but to say, yeah, we're all human beings, we're all one, and let's get along. Let's get along. And if we build a strong border with security, but also community, okay, with safety and security for everybody, people will want to go there because it could add to our gross domestic product because we can make things. We can make cars, for instance, where we make the body of the car on this side of the border. And we have an integration with parts being outsourced to Mexican companies. And people can come there and create jobs. It can be GM.
I find myself really confused by what you're proposing because on the one hand it sounds very much like free market, mutually beneficial relationships and transactions,
Right.
but taking place across a 10 to 12 foot wall that people
It
can't
doesn't-
cross.
You know, I mean, the wall isn't just the places that you don't have a city. We have walls, you know, there's like pairs of U.S. and Mexican cities. I know the El Paso and Juarez. They are a pair. Now, if you had more industry there on both sides, you don't really, from what I remember, you didn't have really much industry in El Paso, but you could. And you could all along the border out to California. And you can be bringing back jobs from overseas, from China. You'll be creating cars. This is what GM does. If you look at GM, they're in Canada, they're in the United States, they're in Mexico. They're all over the place. And that's the government's now, right? I mean, very close relationship with the government. We can go in there and create industry and manufacturing. Like I say, these people are very talented. They manufacture a lot of things, including cars, cameras, computers. There's no problem with that. They need to kind of reorient their economy, and we should integrate ours with them,
All right.
and we can have a great future.
That leads to another issue involving the economy, which is tariffs. I want to get into that when we return. We'll
Okay.
also take a call from Mike in Farmington and anybody else who wants to contribute. 651-989-5855. Closing argument. Steve Carlson in studio with us, candidate for U.S. Senate running as a Democrat. My name's Walter Hudson, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
You know, I went to Minnehaha Academy. I got a scholarship there when I was a kid, you know. And I've always been involved in these theological kind of philosophical good, and I wouldn't say good and evil, but good, you know, arguments about the possible and the good, you know. Ever since I was a teenager, I would meet kids and we would talk about that. And I feel like we're still talking about it. I think that's very positive. I think we need a lot more of that in Washington to break open some of the thoughts like you've been bringing up. You know, I mean, we need more libertarian thoughts in Washington. We do. But they don't need to be like just Rand Paul talking about the evil of the Fed. That's one issue. But all these issues require liberty. And what do we mean by liberty and what's the proper role? And of course, these are kind of moral issues that have to do with diversity and difference. And they're very important too. You know, I wrote the cultural pluralism requirement for the University of Minnesota. You know what that is? Before you would graduate from CLA, you would have to take 2 courses. They were quarters then in African American Studies, Chicano Studies, American Indian Studies, or East Asian Studies. Finally, we threw in Women's Studies, which I shouldn't have done. But and some Indian and Chicano students were working really hard with me on that. We passed it, and it went on for years. And so I really am interested in the history of all of these people. And unfortunately, the mass media and even the educational system, they don't get it. They don't get to it. And we need the professors to hammer it out. Like in this book, this Schlesinger, he actually did an excellent job. The same year we passed that requirement is when he published that book, The Almanac of American History. There's a lot that can be done. That's why I get excited about it. You know, both education and the political possibilities of serious discussion and learning. But of course, elections are notoriously not that, especially now. They don't have serious discussion. You don't have your William F. Buckleys or people kind of really try to take things apart. Things are coming too fast right now. I don't think Buckley could keep up with everything that's happening now.
Well, nobody, yeah, there's.
How come they? Why do you keep turning my button off? Just automatically.
When we go to break, you know.
Oh, okay. But yeah, it's a bad situation right now. And our job is to make it better. And I think right here tonight we are making it better. If you get people to listen to some of these things, and I would debate all of this with Amy Klobuchar. I've had debates with anybody who would debate. I've had a lot of debates. This is much less, you know, restrictive than the ones I've got in. Where, you know, you have a lot of shouting and not much listening.
Yeah. No, I try not to do that.
Well, you have kind of a one-on-one format too, which I think is good. if you got people who actually, are going to get into it, get into the serious discussions. So how many kids you got? Both boys? Wow. Where do they go to school?
They go to the St. Michael Albertville School District. One is third grade next year, and the other is we're going to hold him back to have him do a second year of preschool before he goes to kindergarten. He's a June birthday, so
Oh, so he gets a double education.
Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 1035 FM, closing argument. My name's Walter Hudson. 651-989-5855, the number to join us this evening. We've got Steve Carlson in studio with us, candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat with views very consistent with the current administration. He's a fan of Donald Trump by his own description. Let's talk to Mike in Farmington. Welcome to the program. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We need two walls, huh? All right. No, I hear you on that. Let's let Steve Carlson respond. I appreciate your call as always, Mike.
Well, that was a oxymoron, I believe, holding failed states accountable. You can't hold a failed state accountable. And so, a little bit of history, but ever since our beginning as a country, people are talking about what a bad guy we are. I don't think we are. But we have been supporting democracy and democratic governments and independence from the other Western powers throughout Latin America, throughout its history. So that's what we need to do. We need to build Mexico up. We need to build these other Central American countries up. And I was going to mention my grandfather, Douglas Henderson, actually was a matador in all of those countries, and also a professional wrestler. Very colorful life he had. So I have actually relatives in Mexico. So I am totally relating to those people there, and we need to help them so they're no longer a failed state. Now, apart from that, everything Mike said is obvious and correct. And again, it's just like the immigration, the so-called ban thing. We need people to calm down and quit using this as a rhetorical device to drown out everybody else in the election with white noise during every election, which, by the way, you don't have debates. So all you have is all these screaming. So that's very well planned out by the Democrats. You have Keith Ellison doing it. You have Tom Perez doing it. They're trying to destroy Donald Trump as if he and Melania are some kind of, Boris and Natasha, kind of couple that's gated in here. It's ridiculous. And these are important issues, and the Mexican people deserve our concern, not only at the border, not only the children, but all of them. Again, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo of 1848, which created that border, it's based on good neighbor relations, and that's what we must have. And so for people like Vicente Fox to be coming out and saying, F you or whatever to Trump is just ridiculous. And the same with, but they can't deal with Trump because they'll get undercut if they deal honorably with Trump. Too many people will undercut them in Mexico. They won't be president anymore. So we need to it's sort of like Kim Jong-un in a way. We've got to kind of get along.
All right, let's talk about dealing with other nations economically when we return. We'll talk about tariffs. Closing argument. My name is Walter Hudson. Steve Carlson in studio with us tonight, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
Well, you do push me into some positions, which usually, a lot of the online debate doesn't get you into. So I really, appreciate that, because these things need to be developed, And I'm going to have to go back and look at these things and, make sure they're consistent with, my values and plans and goals. But I think they are. But you almost have to kind of, I won't say improvise, but you've got to be kind of spontaneous in responding to some of these points, which aren't often brought up. People only talk about with each other what they agree with. So most of these things won't come out. So they're all, maybe you're in that group. I don't know. But you talk about all these things very extensively. And I admire that, getting very extensive into the questions. And I try to do the same thing too. That's why I wish the noise would die down a little bit and we could have serious talks.
Yeah, that would be nice. It's a tall order nowadays.
But candidates find that, just like a lawyer, that don't put your person on the stand, don't deal with the issues that aren't going to benefit you, and so they're not addressed. And that's what government has to do. And we have the best government possible to do that, if we would just use it. I feel something good is going to come out of these times, the more I think about it. Because we are going to survive. People are going to find out we're good people. And we've got a good plan, and we're going to stick with it. And like Trump always says, you'll be very happy. It's actually true. People are being happier now. They're getting more jobs. Pretty soon they get better educations. See, that guy there was kind of, like you say, from a more conservative. I see those people. I listen to them too. And I listen to the other. I follow reporters a lot. I follow all the national press. Before they report it in a story, I always already see them talking about it. New York Times, Washington Post, anybody I can stand. Channel 4 blocks me. Pioneer Press blocks me. Because they get into these discussions and they can't handle it, They can't take it that somebody might actually throw back at them an argument which might challenge them. But you have to do that to keep people involved. It's part of the dialectic, isn't it?
Right.
A genuine dialogue. We really need it. Who are you going to have tomorrow?
I don't have a guest lined up for tomorrow.
Don't some of these candidates want to come on, or don't they talk about these issues, like legislative races and stuff like that?
I mean, we get our share of people on, but I'd say half the guests we have, either they asked to come on or there's some other impetus, like a conversation like what we had.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, I was thinking.
I don't chase
Right.
guests for the most part because I don't have time.
Well, I was interested in coming on. Definitely. I was interested in coming on with Tim Kinsley, too. Although Tim called me up. Can you believe this? I'm sitting there in the back of a Salvation Army van because I'm out bell ringing. I get a call from Tim Kinley. He says, we were just down at the court on this case with the Minnesota Voters Alliance, and everything that they talked about was your cases. Can you give me a list of your cases? Why is the Supreme Court and Ramsey County talking about your voting cases? So, but still, I like to talk with people who like to think. Half these people, if you'll say something, they'll look at you like, how could you possibly think that? It doesn't jive with my limited thinking, what is politically correct. How dare you, And we can have a democracy that's like that. I can stand their opinions. I don't want them to kill cops, but I'll listen to a philosophical argument, from them. I won't listen to their actions or their chants, But I want to understand. It's almost like psychotherapy sometimes. What is it that you actually have in your mind? And with the left right now, the way it is, you almost need psychotherapy, and which I have a background in too. I mean, I've read books about it,
We're coming back. All right, so we've got Steve Carlson in studio with us tonight. He's a candidate for U.S. Senate, running as a Democrat. And the reason, the catalyst for bringing him in this evening was to talk about tariffs. That was the disagreement in the wake of our co-host, Bob Anderson, who is a candidate for U.S. Senate running as a Republican for the other seat that is up this year. The topic of tariffs came up during that conversation, and Steve was listening and started to engage me on social media, and that's why we have him in studio tonight. So let's finally get around to it here on Closing Argument. My name is Walter Hudson, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM. Catch us streaming at TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com and on your iHeartRadio app. We're here 9 to 11 weeknights. 651-989-5855, the number to join us. Brett Omlin taking those calls and producing the show. So, my take on tariffs in a nutshell is that they are inherently and always consistently economically destructive, because what they do is they disrupt the process of a buyer trying to seek the highest value at the lowest cost in the market. There is no scenario whereby adding a tariff to a transaction, which is a tax, adding a tax to a transaction adds value to that transaction. And therefore, the idea that we're somehow going to tax ourselves to prosperity in the form of tariffs is inherently flawed. Your response to that, Steve Carlson?
Well, I think the idea that tariffs are never valuable is just historically wrong. Now, what you're talking about is something people will always say Smoot Hawley, in those sentences, and they're talking about the 1930s. But if you look at the beginning of our country, well, first of all, the tariffs funded the federal government basically instead of the income tax until 1917.
Just to pause on that point, because I think that's a totally legitimate statement. However, I think a distinction that we need to make is the tariffs that funded the federal government were universal tariffs. So it was a tariff on everything that came into the country at a certain rate for the explicit purpose of funding the federal government. They weren't targeted tariffs meant to protect particular industries such as the ones we're considering.
And I don't think that's what Trump is trying to do. Trump is trying to in fact, he offered that everybody would drop their tariffs. But if you look back at the history again, I did mention in 1917, and I was surprised to see that when I looked it up last year. But first of all, is protectionism. Now, this country was founded on protectionism. If you look at the extremely rapid economic growth of both the United States and actually Britain at the time that our colonies were founded, a lot of it was attributable to the Industrial Revolution. But that happened with the extreme protectionism. Where it comes from is the Britain government did not even allow us to make our own shoes. They would not allow us to ship our products to them or any other country in our own ships, because they wanted their British subjects to make shoes to sell to everybody with the new technology that made really good shoes and to build ships.
But I mean, it sounds like what you're actually saying is that we rebelled against the protectionism of the British.
No, well, we had a war over that, but both countries exploded economically. That's my point. My point is that we had amazing economic growth during that time. And so you have to go back and say, well, why did we have that? And so what you're looking at is this really an ideological argument with certain industries who feel like they're hit by, like you say, they're hit by the trade war kind of, a scenario. I'm not saying that it happens all the time that there's trade wars whenever there's a tariff, but you're right. From a strictly, rational, classical economics point of view, it's going to be an added cost, and then it's going to be passed on to the consumer. And why would you do that?
So I appreciate you acknowledging that.
Yeah.
But you obviously believe that under certain circumstances, it's nonetheless the right thing to do. So describe those circumstances.
Well, for instance, you don't want to lose whole industries. Okay, so even though you might say there's a greater value to some set of consumers because you've had this also perfect, classical economics, which you never really have. That's always it's never perfect. There's never perfect knowledge of any of the economic players. They don't know what the best prices are. They're basically engaged in economic activity. The good thing about the classical economics, you want to give people a chance to change their choices if it will benefit them. And I think
isn't that chance only available with the choice?
No, I think it's always available. I think everybody always has choices. And so
but you're talking about taking away the choice by imposing a tariff, imposing a government restriction.
You're not taking it away, but I do think that it can be affected. And we don't want that. We don't want, if our farmers want to sell to China, we want them to be able to do that. And I think Trump wants that too. The big thing that's coming up now is the national security, okay? We were before they made that new budget deal, after the debacle of the financial cliff and the shutdown of the government, and then Trump made a big, massive deal on the budget, which funded our defense, funded our military, because it was being held hostage by these politics. So that's a very good thing. But before that, we were losing control of our ability to set prices for steel and aluminum as we have this buildup of the military, which we have and we're going to have. But and we also will need that to produce more cars. So and export and for use here at home. And so we need the steel. We need to take the iron ore out of northern Minnesota. We have plants that are shut down. I mean, if you're looking at the effect of protectionism, I mean, look at northern Minnesota. What's that all about? It's about basically another country like China coming in and dominating not just the U.S. commodities market for iron ore and copper, but the whole world.
So let's
and so we're at their mercy.
Let's explore that a little bit.
Sure.
Because when you talk about China dominating the market on something like steel or aluminum, there's a reason for that, right? Like the reason people would choose to import their steel from China is, again, because they're seeking the highest value at the lowest cost. So isn't that good? Like if your concern is national security and you want to be able to build up the military infrastructure of the United States in as efficient a manner as possible and get the most bang for your buck, wouldn't you want to get the lowest priced, highest quality steel available on the global market rather than just restrict it to what you can produce domestically?
Absolutely. I was looking at the other end of the production where people are taking all the ore. So the first time I became aware of China's massiveness when I was looking at like Australia, and they were buying up all of their commodities. They're buying up all of our commodities because they have a massive engine. Now, as far as steel production, the problem we've had with steel production is that we had the old style factories and foundries. And so that's what shut our iron ore down, is the other countries were able to produce steel much more efficiently because they had more modern plants, had smaller plants, and we want those too. And now we need to get those. We don't want just to use the iron ore, but we don't want to be inefficient for our military. No.
You're a market guy, as I can discern from some of the things you've said.
Right.
What is it that motivates a business to improve its processes? Isn't it competition?
You know, if you look at World War II, that was one of the greatest engines for economic growth in our history.
So
obviously.
we need to go into more wars?
No, but people got to get serious, and we knew that they weren't always the cheapest prices. The thing about World War II production is quality control. It was amazing quality control. You've heard of, built-in obsolescence. They were building cars that never broke down, so they couldn't sell any cars. And so we need to have that kind of quality, and that's going to make our goods more competitive. These things you can't control, like you say, they're controlled by market forces.
But this is, and we do have to go to a break.
Sure.
But in as concise a manner as you can address this,
Sure.
this would be my question in response to that. How are you going to get there? How are you going to improve quality by eliminating foreign competition? Because that's what a tariff is for, right? Like the whole purpose of it is to neutralize the foreign competition so that you can make the domestic production viable.
Okay, let me just address that. If you look at our farms, now if we go into this tariff situation more deeply, our farming can be hit. But we have always had subsidies, and essentially tariffs and subsidies are the same thing, to help our farmers so we don't lose them. So, and we protect them against erosion, drought, and also changes in the market. And that's a helpful thing. It doesn't mean we don't want them to be the best possible farmers, but it means we recognize that these are important national resources. Steel is just as food is, and we've got to protect that. And that's what I see Trump doing. And because we haven't protected it, here in Minnesota, we've just lost massive jobs. And we can't have this. We've gone through the steel industry getting beat out by foreign competition, and now auto industry, and the people in the Iron Range are in trouble. And that you heard that when Trump came. They know.
They are very grateful for the protectionism that they are enjoying.
Not protectionism, but the attention. They're not. How are they being protected? Because
what's the point of doing the tariff if it's? I mean, you just talked about jobs.
Yeah.
That isn't a tariff meant to provide jobs for a particular industry? Isn't that inherent? Isn't that what protectionism is?
I don't think so. I think it's just to make sure you have an industry. What Britain was concerned about is they couldn't have a shipbuilding industry, which they used to beat the Spanish Armada. It was very key to their national security, and they did not want to let it get away. We need to also protect ourselves, and this isn't all going to be about tariffs. We want fair trade, and we also want national security. So I think that there's a basket of not deplorables, but good economic policies coming out of Donald Trump.
Steve Carlson, Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate. We'll wrap this up when we return. Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM, TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
Man, I feel like I'm over in the corner getting worked over.
Oh, that's
No, it's great. I love it. I love it. I don't meet too many people who can do that. You're very astute, man, in just taking arguments and making good questions and arguments. I noticed that about your writing. You know, the further you go, you still think clearly. There's so many people that, I mean, that's very unusual.
I wish it wasn't. I really do.
What we need is more media. We need more new media for people like you that can, you know, get people involved.
Yeah.
You know. So you don't have a, what do you call it, podcast? You don't have a podcast. Huh?
Well, we podcast the show.
Okay, that's
But,
great.
You know, I don't got time to be producing stuff outside of this. I mean, my day, like tomorrow morning, so we're done at 11. If I'm lucky, I'll be home like 10 minutes before midnight. I gotta take a shower, get ready to, you know, put fuel in the van and get ready for tomorrow morning, which will start at like 6, quarter to 7.
Why?
Because I have a day job.
Oh yeah. What's that?
I do courier work, which is 9, 10, 11, 12 hours a day.
Keeps you in shape though.
Well, it's
So
more,
far.
it's more driving than walking.
Oh yeah.
But, you know, so my day is dawn till dusk and beyond.
You remind me a little bit of this Bradley Dean. Not that your politics are the same.
Oh, I know who you're talking
But
about.
he works I think he worked at the airport, you know, doing this real and then he had these really good news productions. I mean, for his you know,
You're talking about the religious guy?
yeah. I saw him out at the airport once. I was working on a jetway, and I didn't quite recognize him. But that's good. I mean,
Whatever happened to him? He kind of disappeared.
I think he's been going through some changes. I can't quite. At first, I thought, well, maybe somebody took over his account and was hacking it. You know, maybe that did happen. But also, they put you in jail. You know, they put you in Facebook jail, like they did with they shut me off for about 12 hours at a time.
Really?
Twitter. Yeah, you'll tweet something and all of a sudden right away, oh, you violated the safety code, you know, and you can't get back on until 12. Push this button to start your 12 hours.
Bradley Dean Smith.
Yeah. He's a musician too.
Yeah, I'm still friends with him,
Yeah, okay.
but I don't see. Let's see. Yeah, he's posting stuff.
Yeah.
I wonder why I don't see it in my thread.
Yeah, that's another issue. No, I follow conservatives because I like clear thinking. I think the problem with many conservatives is they don't go far enough. They don't want to hear about the problems that they can't solve, you know.
Maybe he moved because he's
North
gonna
Carolina or something.
No, he's going to be in Wisconsin at a church in Amory, which I don't know where Amory, Wisconsin is. But on this coming Thursday, he's going to be at a church in Wisconsin. So maybe he moved to Wisconsin.
See, I always felt that being a Christian made you a lot smarter. I don't know why, but I think it was always because you're looking for God's handiwork for the creation and order and try to kind of understand it. Whereas people don't believe in that. I don't know, they kind of believe in just luck, you know, and it doesn't do much for intellectual development, you know. So I think a lot of the great thinkers have always been people who had faith. Even, what's his name? A great philosopher, Charles Sanders Peirce, in his last days, you know, he became a very intense Christian, believed in universal love and everything, even though he was a philosopher, you know, raised in a scientific laboratory, you know. You ever heard of him? A very interesting guy. That's a guy worth reading. He's America's preeminent philosopher, according to Noam Chomsky. See, I even listened to, I met Noam Chomsky. I talked with Noam Chomsky. You know, I was going to go out there and study, and Professor Chomsky said, "You do know that I teach linguistics, don't you?" I said, "Yes." He thought I was just interested in his politics, you know, because I would go listen to him, you know. He's getting kind of old. I like him. He's very interesting. He's deep into Israel, and he's kind of a liberal, I guess, over there, but he's really deep thinker,
We got like maybe 4 minutes,
Okay.
4 minutes.
Whatever, man. I've enjoyed it. Thank you.
Short segment on our way out this evening with Steve Carlson in studio, U.S. Senate candidate running as a Democrat. My name's Walter Hudson. Closing argument, Twin Cities News Talk, AM 1130, 103.5 FM. We got Barry in St. Paul on the line who has a comment for Steve Carlson. Welcome to the program. Appreciate the thought, Barry. I that resonates with me. I mean, one of the arguments in favor of tariffs that I've heard quite a bit from callers and from other sources doing research for the show is as a reaction to the encroachments by other nations. So people will talk about the slave labor in China. They'll talk about the flooding of the market with steel or whatever the case may be. All these manipulations that other governments do, which the premise there seems to be that when government involves itself in the market, it's bad. So why then would the answer to that be our government involving itself in the market?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I felt that what Barry was saying was that he thinks that tariffs make the government grow bigger, and I would focus on that too. Yes, I have since 2010, the Move America Forward Act that I proposed was to shrink the federal government. We got to reduce the federal government. We've got to shift the power and the resources. All those areas that the Congress has preempted and taken away from the states have to be reduced and given back to Minnesota. I guess what we get, like 78% of the money that we send to Washington, we get back to the state in some form. We've got to keep that money here. So we don't want tariffs to grow the government. And I don't know. Usually, I guess those companies are probably based in some state, and they can get a lot of the revenue from it. And I think that's very good. They have more of a business, and they get more money back. I think that's great.
Speaking of federalism,
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons why we have a federal government, one of the reasons why the several states at the outset, at the founding, decided that it'd be a good idea to come together and create a compact between them, which became eventually the Constitution of the United States, was in order to regulate commerce. And of course, that term, regulate commerce, is something that in the modern context means something very different from what it did at the outset. At the outset, it just meant to make commerce regular. And part of that meant not having tariffs and other economic restrictions between the states. Isn't that an admission, just the fact that we have that compact, an indication that there's value there in being able to trade freely over political boundaries?
That's certainly true, and we want that with the European Union, and we want that with all of our partners. And I think that is why we want fair trade. We would like to eliminate those tariffs. Now, the exception is the national security right now. But obviously, yes, we want trade with Mexico. That's what we need with Mexico. We need trade with China. We need trade with Europe, with Russia. Russia should be back in the G8. And yes, that's what we want. We want to spread that opportunity to the Middle East where they can diversify their economies
Do you have a website that people can check out?
Yes, Steve Carlson for USSenate2018.com. Thank you.
Steve Carlson has been our guest in studio tonight. Closing argument. My name is Walter Hudson. Check us out tomorrow, 9 to 11 weeknights. Glenn Beck is next. TwinCitiesNewsTalk.com.
Wow, Glenn Beck. Wow, that was really great. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That was fun. And